On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, we look at Fortis analysis from chaos to complicated, fixing the port congestion at Los Angeles and Long Beach, and we provide a maritime alternative. Hi, I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to delve into the specific issues of the Port of LA and Long Beach and global shipping in entirety. We're not going to be looking at training ships running into bridges. Instead, what I want to do today is look at a post that was done last week by @ManIntegrated on Twitter. And if you don't know who @ManIntegrated is, it's Ross Kennedy. And Ross is one of those people you need to follow on Twitter. Let me be 100% clear about this. If you want to understand the supply chain, I know a fraction of the knowledge that he knows about this. He is an expert on this, and he has a huge following on Twitter. And people have been listening to him, what he's been talking about for a long time. He talks about choke points for a long, long time before this ever happened. But he came out last week, October 10th, I think it was, with a podcast, hour and a half long, where he talks specifically about solutions to this problem. So I'm going to talk about a maritime potential solution or alleviation. Let's put it that way. I don't think it's a solution. It won't fix it, but it could help alleviate it because Ross mentioned it in his podcast. So this is the podcast that went up. I'll, of course, have links to this in the show notes. So this is what Ross put out: from cost to complicated, fixing the port congestion at LA and Long Beach. He goes in, the first 30 minutes of this is a great kind of recap of how we got to where we are, what's going on. And then the last hour talks about potential solutions to it. I'm not going to recap the whole thing. Listen to it. I really strongly recommend, if you really want to hear someone with some great ideas on this, this is what you listen to. But at about the hour and 25-minute mark, he talks about maritime components. He actually references me in it. So I had to come in because again, you're going to mention my name, I'm going to come in. And I want to throw something out there on the maritime side that I think could be useful for doing this. So Ross put this together, this great kind of fishbone chart here on what's causing the port gridlock. And he identified kind of 6 elements right here. You know, there are political issues, financial issues, manpower, physical machinery, and then other assets that are all at play, and they all contribute to the port gridlock. And one of the things that Ross does, and I do the same thing, is whenever you hear anybody say this is the issue for the gridlock, there's not one single issue here. There's a myriad of issues. I'm a historian, and one of the things I teach my students all the time is that there's not one event that causes the next. It's a series of events. It's a web of history that can basically influences current events. If you're able to go back in time, if you can fire the DeLorean up to 88 miles an hour, if you can get in the hot tub time machine and go back to June 28th, 1914 and stop the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by Gavrilo Princip, you don't stop World War I from happening. You don't. It's something else is going to cause it. And in many ways, the port gridlock here is caused by a myriad of issues. And what needs to be done is not one single thing, but a myriad of things to start unraveling this. And so Ross goes into this. And again, as I mentioned to you before, you need to follow him if you're not following him on Twitter. If you don't have Twitter, the whole reason to get Twitter is to follow good people. Don't tweet if you don't want to, but follow good people. And Ross is one of those ones you want to follow and everything. And I just enjoy his hairstyle. I don't know what it is about it. But Ross has a hairstyle that I can associate with. So federal government and state governments are all coming out with issues. We know that the Biden administration came out. They created this supply chain distribution task force to address short-term supply chain issues. They came out and announced 24/7 for the ports of LA and Long Beach, but the ports of LA and Long Beach are not going 24/7, as I showed you in the previous video. They're not. This week, the port of LA's terminals are all going to be shut on Sunday, most on Saturday, even a few on Friday. So what the federal government is doing is throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks. And opening the ports 24/7 is not the end-all be-all solution, because that's fixing a kink in the supply chain. The problem is this chain is knotted, and you need to do a lot more than pop a kink out of the chain to get this thing flowing. Even today, Governor Newsom came out with a statement from the governor, and I just came out today, where he's basically calling for efforts to address state, national, and global supply chain challenges. He signed an executive order directing state agencies to identify additional ways to alleviate congestion at California ports. So Ross talked about a lot of things. And one of the things he mentioned I want to go into detail with is he cited the Maritime Administration. Now, the Maritime Administration has been in the news because there is a new nominee for the Maritime Administration, Rear Admiral 1-star Ann Phillips, who left the Navy in 2014. She's been working for the governor of Virginia as part of their climate task force, has been named to become the new Maritime Administrator. And I've been asked the opinion about this. And let me be clear. There have been successful maritime administrators. There have been terrible maritime administrators, more terrible than successful, in my opinion. Is there a gauge for whether or not they have experience in the maritime industry or not? No. My concern is a shipping crisis is going on, and having a background of some kind in the maritime industry helps. I'm just going to say that. I do think it helps. But the Maritime Administration has a long history. And I just want to show you one thing real quick. So the Maritime Administration came back into effect in 1916 under the Shipping Act of 1916, the Alexander Act. And it's gone through several iterations. It was the U.S. Shipping Board, it was the Shipping Commission, it was the Maritime Commission, and now it's the Maritime Administration. Ever since 1950, it's the Maritime Administration. And in 1961, they hacked off the Federal Maritime Commission. And now what it does, and here it is right here on their About Us page, the Maritime Administration is the head of the Maritime Administrator is the head of the Maritime Administration and advises and assists the Secretary of Transportation on commercial maritime matters, the U.S. maritime industry, and strategic sealift. The administrator also maintains liaison with public and private organizations concerned with the maritime industry. So there's an issue here about what role does the Maritime Administration have the current shipping crisis? And I've heard from people in the Maritime Administration saying, we have no role whatsoever. This is the Federal Maritime Commission, because the Federal Maritime Commission deals with international shipping. The Maritime Administration, not the Maritime Commission, the Maritime Administration deals with domestic. Well, part of this is domestic, I would argue. If you're looking at what's happening right now, we're seeing massive congestion in the ports of LA and Long Beach. Our favorite site, Marine Traffic. I don't know how the guys at Marine Traffic are not sponsoring my YouTube page. As much attention as I give you guys at Marine Traffic, I should at the very least get a complimentary subscription to Marine Traffic. Giorgio, guys in Athens, come on. Anyway, I turn this on. It goes right here to LA and Long Beach. It shows you I'm on Marine Traffic too much. This is the jam off the West Coast right now. And one of the things that we know, and I want to show you something different than I usually show, and that's the road system here coming in. LA and Long Beach. First of all, the port of LA. Why LA has a port is a whole story into itself. You really want a really interesting story, because LA is up here. But there is a small little sliver of road that runs down here to the port of LA, so that Los Angeles has its own port, and then Long Beach next to it. Well, besides that, 40%, 35 to 40% of all the cargo in the United States by container comes through. This is a national security issue. Can I be clear about this? The government, the military, is not paying attention to this at all, and they really need to be. This is it. Understand that 30 to 40% of all cargo is coming in through here, and they come in through two gaps in the breakwater right here. What happens should those gaps be blocked? You choke off 30, 40% of our trade. There needs to be some alternatives here. And one of the problems that we've seen, and this is true across the maritime industry, is a term that I use all the time when I talk about the maritime industry, and that's consolidation. If you zoom out of this issue, you come away from LA and Long Beach, and let's look at the West Coast of the United States here. If you look at the West Coast of the United States, there's only a few ports here. There's LA, Long Beach, there's Oakland, and there's Seattle, Tacoma. There's Portland and a few smaller ones, but it's Wainimi and San Diego. But in terms of cargo ports, it's LA, Long Beach, it's Oakland, it's Seattle, Tacoma. If you look at the East Coast, it's much different. You've got New York, New Jersey. You've got the ports of Virginia. You have Charleston. You have Savannah. You have Jacksonville. One of the things that we see in the news right now is Florida is announcing their ports are open. Florida is open for business. Send them containers. That's great, Governor DeSantis. But one quick thing, the port of Miami handles 1 million containers a year. The port of LA handled 1 million containers last month. There's a bit of a difference. Plus, the other thing is when you offload a container, you're now in South Florida. You got to get it out of South Florida. So even offloading in Florida doesn't help you. What needs to be done here is to increase the flow of goods on the West Coast. And more importantly, open up LA and Long Beach. Open up LA and Long Beach. So I want to give you two alternatives here that can open up the ports of LA and Long Beach and begin to move things. So what's clogging up the port? What's clogging up the port is two things. Number one, it's not offloading the vessels. We are not having an issue with getting containers off the vessels. The cranes are moving. The problem we're having is the containers in the yard. The containers are jamming up this yard. They're jamming it up to the point that you can't move it anymore. You can't move it anymore. And what we need to do is get these containers out of LA and Long Beach to someplace else. So one of the things that Ross talks about is using open areas in LA and Long Beach, the parking lots at Dodger Stadium, maybe the Marine Corps Air Station, at Barstow, some other thing. I want to throw another one up here for you. What I want to use, and Ross mentions this in his video, and that's why I wanted to do this, is the Ready Reserve Force. The Ready Reserve Force is a fleet of vessels maintained by the Maritime Administration, 41 vessels right now. They're maintained by the Maritime Administration. They're used in time of war, but also national emergency. They're not just solely dedicated to the Department of Defense. This is why they're not under the Department of Defense. They're under the Department of Transportation, under the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. On the West Coast, this is a map of the Ready Reserve Force and where they're located. And we're just going to look at the West Coast over here. So up in Tacoma are two vessels, the Cape Intrepid, the Cape Island. I'm going to look at 6 vessels right now. Over in Alameda, there's the Gemstone and the Keystone State. And right down in Long Beach are the Cape Inscription and the Cape Isabella. Come back over here, right here, go back into the port. Here's your container terminals. Here's all your business right here. You see containers over here on the LA side. You see container ships over here on the Long Beach side. And right here is Cape Inscription and Cape Isabella. These are 2 Cape I class roll-on, roll-off vessels. There's 2 others up in Tacoma, Intrepid and Island. These are the Cape I's right here. They're older ships built back in the 70s. They're what's called a roll-on, roll-off vessel. And what these vessels have is a huge stern ramp that comes down, and inside they're big parking decks. They're big, huge, massive parking decks. And what you tend to do is roll tanks, trucks, LAVs, Humvees, everything you could possibly imagine onto these things. 149,000 square feet of cargo space you can put on them. You can put every piece of military equipment on the world, but you can also put containers on chassis in there. You can load these vessels up with containers and chassis. And there's 4 of these vessels, 2 in LA Long Beach, 2 in Tacoma. And what you can begin to use these vessels for is to load containers and chassis that need to go someplace else, or better yet, move them to another site. You can shift them off. You can take containers and chassis out of these yards, come down to the pier here, or you move them over to the car dock over here, and you can load them with containers and chassis. They can also just take pure containers on the upper decks. You can load them and then take them to another terminal. You can take them, for example, down to San Diego. You can run them down to San Diego, not too far down the coast, run them into San Diego and use the facility at San Diego. Hueneme, I'm not sure you can get into Hueneme or not. I'm not sure the port depth in Hueneme. That may be an issue, but you can run them parallel to I-5. You can run the 4 ships on a route from LA Long Beach to Oakland to Portland to Seattle to Tacoma. You can pick up empty containers and move them, reposition them back down. The point is you can move these vessels and set this service up. And understand, this is not the government running this. Those ships are contract operated to commercial firms. They're government-owned vessels, but we have commercial firms that operate them. Moving these chassis and containers, we can charge fees for them. Nominal fees, you don't have to charge a huge amount, but you can charge a fee for that. This does not have to be free, but we can get these ships moving. These ships were actually, the 4 I's in particularly, were all built in the United States. They meet Jones Act requirements. They don't have to because they're government-owned vessels, but because of the requirement of the Jones Act, they meet those requirements. They can basically move up and down the coast with no problem. And understand, this has been done in the past. There have been U.S. steamship companies that have been created, which were government owned, but publicly operated. Panama Line was that way. U.S. lines, when they first started, where it was a government owned corporation, they operated this way. And what we can do is set up these 4 vessels on a route. The sail, I'm sure it's a day between LA and Long Beach and Oakland. It's another day to Seattle. You can have the 4 vessels moving. They could be dropping ramps and dumping off containers and chassis right there. You can actually load the tractor trailers completely on board. You can put the crew, you can put the drivers on board. They can sleep on board. You can put sleeping units on board. There's limited passenger facilities, but for overnight, you can set up sleeping facilities on board. You can throw some containers on board with bunks and AC units and heater units and run them if you want. You can run them like European car ferries do throughout the area, and you can run them parallel to I-5. You have 4 vessels, 4 Cape I's that can do it. Now, there are other vessels too. Military Sealift Command operates large medium-speed railroads, even bigger versions of these things. These vessels, the Cape I's right here, they're, again, built in the 1970s, 684 feet long, 102-foot beam. Again, they can carry 345 containers, 148,000 square feet of cargo. The LMSRs, the large medium-speed railroads, 2 of which are up in the Seattle-Tacoma area, they are 950 feet long. They can carry over 300,000 square feet. They're about twice the size of this. And so, plus these ships have cranes on the foremast, on the forward part of the ship. The LMSRs have them too. And you can start running these ships up and down the West Coast. To do that, you can do the same thing on the East Coast, by the way. You can do the same thing running between ports and the East Coast, although I don't think you need as much on the East Coast. We're focusing on the West Coast. The other vessels you can add are these vessels, which are the Gem State and the Keystone State. These are what's called crane ships. Let's zoom in here a little bit because I realize my picture probably is not coming through here very good. So we'll zoom in here a little bit and give you an image here of what I'm talking about here with these things. So these were actually container ships. These were actually container ships. These ships are even a little bit older, unfortunately, the 1960s. But they're American-built ships, so they meet the Jones Act compliance right now. There's not 3 of them. So it shows 3 in Alameda, but 1 was just taken out of service. But these ships were part of 12 vessels that were initially envisioned to be converted. Back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, there was a concern because so many container ships were going to be gearless without cranes that if we got into the Cold War and we needed to offload container ships in Europe, the facilities in Europe would be hit, the container cranes would be hit. So these ships were fitted with these large pedestal cranes so that they can pick and offload containers. They're designed to actually, these cranes are not center line, they're off center. The ships were designed to go alongside container ships and pick containers off and offload them. Now, the problem is they were designed to do this on container ships that are a lot smaller than they are today, but that's not what I'm calling for them to do. But you can run these 2, and there's actually 2 other ones. There's 2 on the East Coast, Cornhusker State and Gopher State. They're a little bit of a different design, but you can bring the 4 of them to the West Coast and you can load them with containers and do the same thing. You can just load containers on board. They can come in. They don't have to go to the container terminals because they have their own cranes. So you can pick off just a spot on the dock that doesn't have container cranes, and you can grab the empties, you can grab loaded ones and move them up and down. And what this is going to do is provide you a service up and down the West Coast. Now, there's going to be critics who are sitting there right now going, got you now, Sal. You're arguing that there should be ships in a coastal route. Why is it that the Jones Act is preventing this? Let's waive the Jones Act and we can get this to happen. Well, a couple of things. Number one, what makes the Cape I's and the crane ships so appealing for this is they don't need shoreside facilities at all. The stern ramp and the cranes on the vessels can come down and they can offload. They don't have to impede commercial terminals and facilities. They're self-sustaining. They can go in and offload. You can drive up the ramp. You can drive off the ramp. All you need is a place to put the ramp down. The Cape, the Keystone State and the Gem State, if you bring, I think it's Keystone State and Gem State. I forget which one now is there. Keystone, Gem State. You can bring them there and you can use the shipboard cranes to offload them. You can use the shipboard cranes to offload them. If you don't have chassis, the military has chassis. Let's activate some of those National Guard units. Let's get their chassis, bring them down to the ports, and we can use those chassis on the Cape Eyes on these vessels to help move the cargo. There is some things we can do to start alleviating this. The other element here that I think is really important to talk about at this same time is, what do we do in the long term to start fixing this? What I'm talking about here, this movement between ports on the West Coast, this movement between LA, Long Beach, Oakland, up to Seattle, Tacoma, is called short sea shipping. The Maritime Administration has a program, what they call their Marine Highway System. This is the Marine Highway System that the Maritime Administration has had out now for over a decade, which they've talked about. One of the things they want to create are these marine highways, and one of them is the M5, which parallels the I-5, these routes parallel major highways. And they've advocated for this, came out with a report in 2011 talking about this. And one of the things they have in here is this idea to create this short sea shipping between routes. And one of the things that they include in here, and I want to get over to it, I obviously don't want you to read all this, but you can, I'll have the link available to you, is they had designed basically nominal vessel designs. These are not actual vessel designs, these are just nominal, for small roll-on, roll-off vessels, for vessels to operate along these coastal ways. And again, one of the issues we have is our aging ready reserve force. You saw the ages of the ships, 1960s for the crane ships, 1970s for the Cape Eyes. Even the LMSRs, that Military Sea Lift Command has, were built in the 1990s, 2000s. And so one of the things we need to do is spur construction. If we had a series of short sea roll-on, roll-off and container vessels that operated parallel to I-5, I-95, and even if they were owned by the government, but operated by a commercial industry, they would be available in time of warfare. And that's one of the things we want to see is how we can use that. Understand, we have used vessels like the Cape Eyes and the crane ships in the past during national emergencies. We've activated vessels for hurricanes. We've stored grain on vessels in time of war. We've stored oil on vessels when we needed to. This will actually improve the readiness of the vessels because they'll be out there operating. You'll be able to use them. And in the case of the Cape Eyes, which are located on the West Coast, and the crane ships, 2 of the 4 are on the West Coast, you can get them in service nearly immediately. It takes 5 days to activate these ships. 5 days. 5 days, you can have them up and running, by which time you can activate National Guard units, you can get chassis, and you can set up what you need on the ground and run this like a military operation. You're not stealing from anyone commercially, because all you're doing is repositioning these containers over into yards where commercial truckers still have to pick them up, but it starts alleviating the congestion inside the port of LA and Long Beach. Remember, what we're seeing here happening in LA and Long Beach right now is the terminals are jammed. They just can't move anything right now. And the problem is the yards are so full. We've seen this. I showed you this the other day, that some of these terminals had no vessels on them. The Express Mekong came into the UTAN facility there not too long ago. But right here at the end of the dock down here, you'll see this. Here's the Cape Eye, and here's the 2 Cape Eyes right here at the very end. They got their ramps down right there. You can see their ramps are down. They can, start loading chassis and cargo right here and be able to go out and take their cargo out and move. So, I mean, it's not like we're talking about a major issue here. These are solutions that can be done right now in a very short period of time. It will actually improve national readiness in case of an emergency, because you'll have those vessels activated. We're talking about the cost to crew and fuel the vessels. It'll be offset by costs that can be paid by the companies, the carriers, and fees. And again, if we don't want to do that, if you don't want to charge the carriers, that's fine. Then let's put a $1 tax on every box coming into the United States. Just in LA, Long Beach, $1. They moved 1 million containers last month. $1 million right there. $1 in the port of LA. And that's all it does. I talked about this for a long time. I talked about the way you refinance Sea Lift is by putting taxes on boxes moving into the United States. And I was told that you're putting a burden on the consumers. Well, the average price of a shipping container has gone from $1,500 to over $10,000. So I don't think $1 or $10 or even $100 is going to be a detriment if you are investing, if you're taking that money, putting it into a specific fund that's used to finance sea lift. You can use that money to pay for this service. You can also use that money to start putting a sea lift construction fund together to start building some of those ships that are talked about in the American, in MARAD's American Highway Program, Maritime Highway Program. So just an option, just going to throw it out there and see what you all think about it. Some people are going to tell me I'm crazy, Sal, you're nuts, but you got to throw some ideas out there. We can't keep focusing on what's wrong. We got to start coming up with solutions. And so I'm going to jump on the bandwagon with Ross Kennedy, Man Integrated, and put this out here as my solution, or one of the solutions. It doesn't fix everything, but it does start putting a dent in the issue. You know, every trip starts with that first step. And I think this is a good element to start with. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Go ahead, hit the bell so to be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment. And most importantly of all, if you enjoy it, share it across social media. Let everybody know. I've started a Patreon page to help offset some of the costs associated with this, to give me more time to do this. So please, if you could, I appreciate it. It gives me more time to do research and prepare for this, and also upgrade equipment and editing programs. Trying to get more jazzy and everything as I go along here. Not too jazzy. I want to keep it simple, keep it back to the basic of just me talking to you. So until the next broadcast, Sal, signing off.